Welcome back to Film Decoded, where we decode legendary films and uncover the stories behind the smartest minds in cinema. The story begins inside a prison in Russia, where we meet a man named Frank Abagnale Jr. Frank is not an ordinary criminal. He's a brilliant and extremely clever con artist responsible for some of the biggest frauds ever committed. At this moment, an FBI agent named Carl Hanratty arrives to take Frank back to America. While Carl is questioning him, something unexpected happens. Frank's health suddenly begins to fail. At first, Carl assumes this is just another one of Frank's tricks. After all, Frank is known for deception, but soon Carl realizes that no one could fake something this convincing. Worried, he rushes Frank toward a hospital, and that's when Frank sees his chance. He tries to escape once again. Unfortunately for him, the police quickly catch him. As he's taken back into custody, Frank's mind drifts into the past, and we finally learn how this incredible journey began. Frank was born into a happy, loving family. His parents cared deeply for each other, and his childhood was filled with warmth and comfort. One day, Frank's father takes him to a shop to buy a suit. The shopkeeper tells them the store is closed. Without hesitation, Frank's father casually pulls out a necklace and asks if it belongs to her. The woman is instantly impressed by his confidence and charm, and suddenly, the shop is open again. This moment tells us something important. Frank's father was a master of small tricks and smooth talk. Soon after, Frank's father asks him to drive the car, and they head straight to a bank. The bank manager greets them politely, but behind the smiles lies bad news. Frank's father has suffered huge business losses. A delay in filing taxes caused by an accountant has ruined him financially. He desperately needs a loan, but no bank is willing to help. The situation worsens. The government confiscates everything: his car, his house, his money, everything he owns. Yet even in the middle of this disaster, Frank's father does something surprising. He opens a bank account in Frank's name. Confused, Frank asks, "Why are you doing this? You're already drowning in debt." His father smiles and replies, "Don't worry about me. Your life is just beginning. You have to live well." Soon after, Frank's life takes another painful turn. His family situation forces him to change schools. On his very first day, a boy starts mocking and harassing him, making fun of his appearance and saying he looks like a teacher instead of a student. And just like that, Frank learns his first harsh lesson. The world doesn't forgive weakness. Angry and humiliated by that boy's comment, Frank decides to turn the insult into an opportunity. The very next day, he walks into the classroom acting like a real teacher. With complete confidence, he confronts the actual teacher and says, "What are you doing here? This is my class. I'll teach now. You can come back later." The poor teacher, completely confused and embarrassed, actually leaves the room. Frank then humiliates the boy who mocked him right in front of the entire class. For an entire week, Frank continues teaching like this, so convincingly that no one suspects a thing. It's only when he's about to take the whole class on a trip that the school finally realizes the truth. The administration is shocked. Frank's parents are called to the school immediately. In front of the principal, Frank's father remains serious and strict. But later at home, he laughs about it with Frank, clearly impressed by his confidence and cleverness. Soon after, Frank's life takes another painful turn. One day, when Frank comes home, he notices another man in his mother's bedroom, a man who works with his father. His mother tries desperately to pretend nothing is wrong. She even hands Frank some money, saying, "Take this and buy something for yourself." But Frank understands everything. A few days later, his parents decide to separate. A lawyer asks Frank a heartbreaking question. "Do you want to live with your mother or your father?" Frank is completely shattered. Watching his family fall apart in front of him becomes unbearable. Unable to handle the pain, Frank runs away from home and travels to another city. He has very little money, just a bank account and a checkbook. At first, he survives by writing checks and giving them to hotel staff. But as the checks start bouncing one by one, the hotel owners throw him out. Then, one quiet moment changes everything. Frank realizes that checks themselves can be altered. This is a time before advanced technology, and banks aren't equipped to detect fraud easily. Taking advantage of this, Frank slowly begins creating fake checks. He writes different names on them and gets them cashed. If a bank manager hesitates, Frank confidently uses his father's old tricks, like that necklace story, to charm his way through. For a while, it works perfectly. But gradually, the truth starts catching up. Banks begin rejecting his checks, and his scams stop working. Then one day, sitting outside a hotel, Frank notices something interesting. A pilot walking by, receiving instant respect and admiration from everyone around him. That's when an idea strikes him. Why not become a pilot? Not real, not exactly fake either. And this single thought is about to change Frank Abagnale Jr.'s life forever. Frank realizes something important. If people respect him, his checks will never be questioned. And respect comes with power, authority, and uniforms. So Frank walks straight into an airport, posing as a reporter. He confidently tells the officials that he's writing an article about pilots and needs some inside information. With his smooth talk, he learns where pilots get their uniforms made. Next, he calls that place and casually says, "My uniform was damaged. I need a new one stitched." Using his usual charm and clever tricks, Frank soon walks out with a perfect pilot's uniform. When it's time to pay, he offers a check, but the employee stops him and says, "We just need your pilot ID. The airline will handle the payment." Frank already has a fake pilot ID ready, and just like that, he gets the uniform for free. Now, dressed as a pilot, Frank goes to the same bank where no one ever took him seriously before. This time, everything is different. The moment the manager sees the uniform, he personally comes forward and gets Frank's check cashed without hesitation. Frank then learns something even more valuable. As a pilot, he can cash large checks, not just small ones, as long as they're salary checks. So Frank takes the next step. He begins creating fake airline salary checks. He removes the airline logo from a toy plane and pastes it onto the check. When he takes it to the bank, the manager respectfully tells him, "Sir, you can cash this directly at the airport." This is perfect. Frank can now cash checks anytime at the airport, and he loves it. At the airline counter, the receptionist casually asks, "Are you flying with us today?" Frank confidently replies, "Yes." She immediately escorts him inside the plane, completely free because pilots don't pay for seats. Inside, Frank is terrified. He's not a real pilot, but on the outside, he remains calm, confident, and charming. He even walks up to a beautiful air hostess and casually asks, "Is this your necklace?" It's the same trick his father once used. The air hostess is instantly impressed. Frank looks slightly older than his real age, and no one suspects that this confident pilot is actually just a 22 to 23-year-old kid living a lie. Frank doesn't just stop at wearing a uniform. He starts charming a bank manager, subtly flirting and observing everything. Step by step, he begins to understand the entire banking system, where checks come from, where they go, how account numbers are assigned, and how banks actually verify payments. That's when Frank discovers something crucial. Bank checks are encoded using typewriters. So what does he do? He goes out and buys the exact same type of secondhand typewriter used by banks. At this point, Frank is no longer just pretending. His fraud has become highly professional. Slowly but steadily, he starts withdrawing larger and larger amounts of money using checks, and his scam grows beyond imagination. Eventually, news of these massive frauds reaches the FBI, and the case is assigned to a determined agent named Carl Hanratty. Carl takes the case very seriously and becomes obsessed with catching this mysterious criminal. Around this time, Frank meets his father, to whom he has been regularly writing letters, proudly describing his life as a pilot. Frank's father genuinely believes his son has become a real pilot, and he's extremely proud of him. Frank tells his father something shocking. "The government took everything from you, so I bought you a car with my earnings, the same one James Bond drove." But instead of being happy, his father refuses. He explains that the government is still chasing him over the tax case. If he accepts the car, it will only be confiscated again. His store has already shut down, and he's living under constant financial pressure. Frank even offers to give him money, but his father gently refuses, saying he can't take money from his own son. By now, Frank has completely understood the system of the entire country. He begins traveling to different states, cashing checks from one state in another, making it even harder to track him. But the FBI is watching closely. Soon, Carl and his team trace Frank to a hotel where his latest check was cashed. When they investigate, they learn something unbelievable. Frank is still staying at the same hotel. He's been there so long that he practically knows everyone. Carl doesn't waste time. He grabs his gun and goes straight to Frank's room. Frank immediately realizes that if he doesn't act smartly, this is the end. So he stays calm and starts playing a new role. He confidently tells Carl, yes, calm down. I'm from the Secret Service. What made you think you were hunting this man alone? The entire government is after him." Carl, suspicious, replies, "Show me your ID. Why should I believe you?" Frank smiles and says, "Do one thing. Keep my wallet. Check it carefully." Carl takes the wallet, but with a gun in one hand, he can't even open it properly. And once again, Frank buys himself precious time, using nothing but confidence and his sharp mind. Frank calmly tells Carl, "Look, our men have already caught that thug. We got here before you." Down below, Frank cleverly helps a blind neighbor into a carriage. From a distance, it looks exactly like the criminal has been arrested. Seeing this, Carl is completely convinced that Frank is telling the truth. With Carl's trust secured, Frank quickly gathers all his fake check-making equipment. He tells Carl that the police will arrive shortly, so he'll place the evidence downstairs. At this point, Carl trusts him completely. Carl even hands Frank his wallet back and says, "Take this." But Frank deliberately refuses and says, "No, you keep it." And with that, Frank quietly walks away, escaping with everything he needs. A few moments later, when Carl finally manages to open the wallet, he realizes the horrifying truth. It's empty. Frank has escaped right in front of him. Carl feels deeply humiliated. His boss scolds him harshly, and in his frustration, Carl even snaps back at his own boss. The failure fuels Carl's obsession even more. Meanwhile, airlines slowly begin to suspect Frank's pilot impersonation. Running the same scam is no longer easy. When the press gets hold of the story, they give Frank a nickname, James Bond. Frank loves it. He starts wearing James Bond-style suits and even buys a similar car, fully enjoying his fame. Time passes and Christmas arrives. Carl is sitting alone in his office when suddenly Frank calls him. This time, Frank's voice is different. He says quietly, "I want to apologize for everything I've done to you." Frank even gives Carl his address, but Carl doesn't believe him. He replies, "You're trying to trap me again. I won't fall for it this time." Then Carl adds something that cuts deep. "You may have money, but you're very lonely. That's why you're calling me." Frank is hurt by this. He hangs up the phone, but this time, Frank was telling the truth. Earlier, Frank had once told Carl his name was Barry Allen, a comic book character. That detail suddenly clicks in Carl's mind. He realizes something shocking. Frank is just a kid who looks older than his age. Carl immediately contacts his office and says, "Prepare a list of children who have run away from home. Someone must have filed a report." After a long and intense investigation, Carl finally reaches Frank's house. When Frank's mother is shown the photograph, she looks at it carefully and says, "Yes, this is my son." And with that confirmation, Carl finally uncovers the truth behind the world's smartest conman. If you're enjoying this incredible cat and mouse chase, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Film Decoded, because the final chapter of Frank Abagnale Jr.'s story is just around the corner. Carl visits Frank's mother and tells her the shocking truth that her son is the #1 swindler in the country. He advises her to inform the police immediately if she hears anything from Frank. But Frank's mother refuses to believe it. She says, "He's just a child. Maybe he took a little money for food and drinks." She even picks up her bag and asks, "How much do I need to pay to fix this?" Carl answers calmly, $1.4 million. Hearing this, Frank's mother is completely stunned. Meanwhile, Frank has moved to another city, living what seems like a perfect life. One day, he visits a hospital for some work. There, he meets a nurse named Brenda, who is crying after being scolded by a doctor. Frank comforts her, telling her she's talented and that the doctor is just unreasonable. And once again, an idea strikes Frank. Since pretending to be a pilot has become risky, he decides on a new identity, a doctor. Frank asks Brenda if there are any job openings at the hospital. He then shows up for an interview, confidently presenting a fake degree from Harvard. The doctors are impressed. Frank even says he prefers helping people in small towns rather than big cities, a statement that wins their hearts. Without hesitation, he's hired. In reality, Frank doesn't treat patients at all. He simply gives vague, useless advice, letting real doctors do all the work. In his free time, he and Brenda grow very close, slowly falling in love. But one day, everything almost collapses. Frank is suddenly called for an emergency case involving a seriously injured child. The sight of blood shakes him completely. Hiding his fear, Frank calmly asks the other doctor, "What would you do in this situation?" When the doctor explains the procedure, Frank nods confidently and says, "That's absolutely correct. I trust you completely. I'll come back later to check on the progress." And with that, he walks away, even though inside he's terrified and close to breaking down. At the same time, Carl visits Frank's father and tells him everything about his son's crimes. Frank's father replies firmly, "I don't know where he is, and even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Carl understands something important. Father and son are deeply connected. Frank must still be writing letters to him. Carl studies the letters carefully, analyzing postmarks and details, and calculates where Frank might be living. Now, with the police, Carl is finally closing in. By now, Frank and Brenda have truly fallen in love. One day, Brenda suddenly breaks down and tells Frank a painful truth. She once had an abortion, and when her father found out, he threw her out of the house. Frank listens quietly. After thinking for a moment, he gently asks, "If I talk to your father about marriage, do you think he'll accept you?" Brenda is overwhelmed with happiness. Soon after, Frank goes to meet Brenda's father, who happens to be a lawyer. Confident as always, Frank tells him that he was a lawyer before becoming a doctor. He had prepared for this too. watching law films, learning the language, and mastering the attitude. With his smooth words and confidence, Frank impresses everyone. Brenda's father looks at him seriously and asks, "Tell me the truth. What did a man like you see in my daughter?" Frank replies honestly, "I'm just an ordinary man who loves your daughter." That answer completely wins him over. Frank then asks another question. "If I want to practice law here, what do I need to do?" Brenda's father replies that since Frank has already completed law school, he only needs to pass an exam to practice locally. And this time, Frank does something unexpected. He actually studies, appears for the exam, and passes. Frank Abagnale Jr. officially becomes a lawyer. The story now returns to the present. Carl finally arrests Frank. During questioning, Carl asks him, "How did you pass that exam?" Frank calmly replies, "What difference does it make? You're taking me to jail anyway, not to court." The story flashes back once more. Frank is getting along well with Brenda's family, and the wedding preparations are underway. He tells Brenda that he wants to meet his father. He shares his dream: "Whatever the government took from us, I'll get it back. Convince Mom too, and we'll all live together like before." But his father breaks his heart. He tells Frank that his mother has married someone else. Frank is crushed. His father then adds another blow. He knows about all of Frank's crimes. Shocked and overwhelmed, Frank leaves without another word. That night, Frank calls Carl and says quietly, "I'm getting married. I want to forget everything that happened between us." Frank hopes, just for a moment, that all the charges might be dropped. But Carl answers firmly, "I will never leave you. As long as I have this job, I will keep chasing you. You can't escape after everything you've done." And with that, the chase reaches its inevitable end. After everything that's happened, Carl comes up with a crucial idea. He knows one thing for sure: Frank cannot change his name after marriage. That gives Carl a narrow but powerful opening. Carl orders his team to track Frank's name everywhere, especially connected to his new identity as a doctor. He carefully reasons that wedding invitations must have been printed somewhere, so he begins monitoring printing presses and related records as well. Soon enough, Frank's wedding day arrives, and just as Carl predicted, FBI agents show up. Realizing the danger, Frank quickly takes Brenda to their room and finally tells her the complete truth about his scams, his lies, and how he fooled the world. But he also tells her one honest thing: he truly loves her. Frank then says, "I'm running away right now. Meet me at the airport tomorrow, and don't tell anyone." The next day, Frank waits anxiously at the airport. Brenda does arrive, but she's not alone. The FBI agents are with her. At that moment, escape seems impossible. But Frank Abagnale Jr. doesn't panic. He improvises. He goes to a college campus and announces that an airline is hiring air hostesses. After conducting interviews, he selects several beautiful young women. Then, surrounded by them and dressed once again in a pilot's uniform, Frank confidently walks into the airport. The police and agents are completely distracted. And just like that, Frank slips away right under their noses. At the same time, a boy who looks similar to Frank is standing outside the airport near a car. The FBI agents rush toward him, believing they've finally caught their man. But when they question the boy, he says a stranger paid him to stand there. By the time the truth sinks in, Frank is already out of the country. Over the next few years, Frank carries out massive frauds across multiple countries. Eventually, information surfaces about his latest location, where he is now printing his own checks. Carl asks his superiors to let him go. "I'll bring him back myself," but they refuse. "We couldn't catch him in our own country. How will you catch him abroad?" Carl doesn't give up. He digs deeper into Frank's past and discovers something critical. Frank is in Russia, but Russia is huge. Where exactly? Then Carl remembers something important. Frank's mother came from a small village in Russia. After more investigation, Carl discovers that there is a printing press operating there. And in that moment, Carl knows this is where the story will finally end. Once again, it's Christmas Eve. When Carl finally reaches the location in Russia, he finds Frank. Frank looks at him calmly and says, "Come, let me show you around. Come outside with me." Carl immediately warns him, "Don't even think about running. If you try anything, the police here will shoot you." Carl then softens his tone and adds, "If you surrender now, I can still save you." Frank looks straight at him and says, "Swear on your children." Carl hesitates, but then takes the oath and says, "Believe me, I'm telling you the truth." Trusting him, Frank finally puts on the handcuffs. But as they step outside, there is no one there. For a moment, even Frank wonders if this is all a trick. But seconds later, multiple police vehicles arrive, surrounding them from all sides. Frank realizes it's finally over. The story shifts back to the present as Carl and Frank are flying back to America. Midway through the flight, Frank quietly says, "I want to talk to my father." Carl's face changes. With a heavy heart, he tells him the truth. His father died after slipping in the bathroom. Frank is shattered. He goes into the airplane restroom and breaks down completely, crying uncontrollably. The plane is about to land, but Frank doesn't come out. Worried, Carl breaks open the door, but Frank is gone. He has unscrewed the sink, crawled into the interior of the aircraft, and escaped once again. The moment the plane lands and the wheels touch the ground, Frank takes his chance and disappears. That very night, Frank goes to meet his mother. He sees that she has settled into a new family, living peacefully, and now even has a young daughter. Frank understands something painful. There is no place left for him here anymore. Carl knows exactly where Frank will go. He reaches Frank's mother's house and arrests Frank once again. At this point, Frank is not even 19 years old. Carl wants Frank to be treated as a minor, believing he still deserves a chance. But the government has other plans. For committing one of the biggest frauds in history, they want to make an example out of him. Frank is sentenced to 10 years in prison, in complete isolation. No conversations, no visitors, no freedom. He is left alone. One day, Carl brings Frank a case and tells him that someone else is committing the exact same kind of fraud Frank once did. Frank calmly asks, "Show me the check." The moment Frank looks at it, he immediately spots the flaw. Without hesitation, he explains what's wrong and how the fraud works. At that moment, Carl realizes something powerful. Only Frank can help stop criminals like Frank. The next time Carl visits him, he brings along other FBI agents. They watch Frank work, and they're impressed by his sharp mind and unique way of solving cases. Slowly, Carl makes a bold decision. Frank is released from prison and offered a job with the FBI. This time, life gives Frank a second chance. He's required to work 8 hours a day, just like everyone else. But there's one strict condition. If he tries to escape, he'll be sentenced to 50 years in prison. Frank genuinely tries to do his job well, but after a while, he starts feeling restless and bored. One day, he secretly pulls his own FBI records and even has them expunged. He plans to escape to another country for the weekend. Before he can act, Carl stops him. Carl looks at him and says, "You're still a kid. Life has given you another chance. Don't waste it. If you run now, you'll spend your entire life in prison." Then Carl adds something unexpected. "I'm not going to stop you. Go. Just come back to work on Monday. No one is following you. You don't have to run anymore." Frank leaves. On Monday morning, Carl waits anxiously, fearing that Frank has disappeared again. For a moment, he believes the worst. But then, Frank walks in. From that day on, Frank works brilliantly, helping the FBI solve case after case. Slowly, he builds a new life. He meets a woman, falls in love, gets married, and finally finds stability. After making a strong name for himself with the FBI, Frank goes on to start his own company, dedicated to eliminating bank fraud. And honestly, who could catch fraudsters better than a former master con artist? This is a true story. Frank Abagnale Jr. didn't just change his life, he eventually became a millionaire the right way. And that's where this incredible journey ends. If you enjoyed this full movie explanation, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Film Decoded, and share it with fellow movie lovers. More amazing stories are coming your way. See you in the next video. Until then, keep decoding films.